Hey everyone, Kitana here and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome to my Astro community. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about empty houses. And this is a topic that I get so many questions on, and especially people that are like a little bit new to astrology are kind of confused about. And really this topic points to a much broader subject, which is house rulerships in astrology. Okay, so first things first, let's clear the air about what apps we're using to read our birth chart. So to understand your birth chart and to have the most accurate birth chart, like literally the most accurate birth chart you can ever have, is from astro.com. And I'll say it again, astro.com is the website you guys need to be using. And I know for some people, they don't know how to read a circle chart yet. So I do have a how to read a circle chart video on my channel. I'll link it up above. But basically that website will show you your circle chart, not the other charts that I think people are reading. And I think a lot of this confusion comes from like having the CoStar app. I think the way CoStar does their, I don't know how they do their like calculations, but CoStar is not accurate. And I'll say that again, CoStar is not accurate. You will not get your most accurate birth chart from CoStar. So if you're using CoStar and you're confused, that's why. So you should start using astro.com to understand your birth chart. Use astro.com, not CoStar, because CoStar will make it seem like you're missing houses, but you're not missing anything. You're just like, it's just not, there's no planets there. So basically, if we have a circle chart, obviously not every single house is gonna have planets in it. And if your house is empty, there's no need to panic. That doesn't mean anything bad. If anything, that, I don't know, that sometimes a house that is empty can be more important than a house that is full of planets. But this really points to the topic of house and planetary rulerships. When it comes to planetary rulerships, you really have to understand what planet rules what sign. Because when we're looking at a birth chart, we're looking at the signs of the houses, right? So if you have a second house, your second house, let's say, is in Scorpio, then Mars rules your second house. And when you're looking at the planetary rulerships, it's best to use traditional rulerships. So traditional rulerships, I'll put a picture of it on the screen. I don't want to go through all of them, but for example, Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo, and then Jupiter would rule both Sagittarius and Pisces. So basically every sign is associated with one planet except for Leo and Cancer. Leo is only ruled by the sun and Cancer is only ruled by the moon. And then that makes it so much easier to look at your birth chart because you look at the outer ring of the chart, right? On astro.com, not CoStar. And let's say you have a Sagittarius 9th house and you're like, okay, boom, Jupiter rules my 9th house. So if you wanted to know more about your 9th house, then you would look at Jupiter. So that brings me to my second point, and that is to understand where the house rulers are placed in your birth chart. Okay, so let's say you have a chart, right? And you're like, oh, well, my 7th house is empty, and you're looking at it, and then your 7th house is in Capricorn. It doesn't mean you're not going to get married, right? Because 7th house is the house of marriage. It doesn't mean there's no action there, but you have to look at the ruler of that sign of that house. So for that specific chart, if your 7th house is in Capricorn, that means Saturn rules your 7th house. So if you wanted to know more about relationships and marriage and stuff like that, you would look at where Saturn is placed in your chart. And even more specifically, you would look at the house that Saturn is in. So let's say you have your 7th house ruler, Saturn, in the 2nd house. That gives you more insight about your marriage, about your relationships. And for that specific example, Saturn in the 2nd house would insinuate that you would have a very stable marriage. You would have a very and then you might have a marriage that is very financially prosperous, or there's something that has to do with, or your marriage would be very stable, or you would have very stable partners, very luxurious partners maybe. So that would give you a lot of insight to your marriage life, your dating life, and it seems scary that, okay, yeah, it's empty, but it's more important to look at the ruler of that house and see what house it's in instead. And then another important example I would give you guys is, let's say your 10th house is empty. 10th house is career, right? Does this mean I won't have a career, or I won't have the career I want, or blah, 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 blah? No. So with 10th house, let's say your 10th house is in, so let's say you have a 10th house in Sagittarius and it is empty, right? It doesn't have any planets there. But what rules Sagittarius? Jupiter, right? So if you look at the house Jupiter is in, let's say your Jupiter is in the 11th house, that means you would find professional success, or you would find your career in something that has to do with maybe community service, humanity. Maybe you have a career online, or a career where you're constantly collaborating with others. Your career would be much more 11th house themed than, and you would only know that if you looked at the ruler of your 10th house and see that it's in the 11th house. So it gives you a lot of insight to what your career would be, and it would be very 11th house themed in that sense. And then for my third point, of course, you want to look at the aspects to that house ruler. So again, going with the same theme of like 10th house, let's say your 10th house ruler, let's say your 10th house is empty, right? Okay, there's no planets in your 10th house. But if your 10th house ruler is like, let's say your 10th house ruler is Venus. Let's say you have a Libra midheaven or a Libra 10th house. You would look at Venus, see where that's placed, see what aspects are aspecting Venus. And I do have a video on aspects if you guys don't know what I'm talking about. I'll link that above. But let's say you had Venus conjunct your sun, and that's like in the 11th house. So Venus conjunct sun, you would have your 10th house ruler conjunct the sun. This means you might be very popular in your career. You might be highly favored. You might be seen as very friendly. There's a certain theme of favoritism with your career or reputation. So this would be a really good thing for you if you had your 10th house ruler conjunct the sun, and you wouldn't know that unless you looked at the aspect that your 10th house ruler was making. And then maybe even on a more challenging note, if you had your 10th house ruler, let's say Venus, if you had a Libra midheaven or Taurus midheaven, Venus rules both those signs, remember. If you had your Venus, let's say, opposition Pluto, then that would show you would have extremes in your career, ups and downs in your career, maybe a love-hate relationship with the public, or your reputation goes through a lot of ups and downs. So that would be a much more challenging manifestation of that. But you would never really know that if you just looked at the sign only and you didn't look at the house ruler. And then there's this really great article on Cafe Astrology that goes really in depth about each of the house rulerships. So it'll go through and tell you literally, like, if you had your first house ruler in the second house, first house ruler in the third house, first house ruler in the fifth house. So if you want to look at it that way, like if you're somebody with like a stellium, for example, and that would mean a lot of your houses are empty, you could go to that website and check to see like, okay, I want to know more about my career. I have my 10th house ruler in my 6th house, and then Cafe Astrology, it has like a little description about what that would mean for your career. So I'll go ahead and link that on the screen or down below, but really check out that website if you're still a little bit confused or you want some more insight. Okay, so really quickly, I just want to do a sample birth chart for you guys so you can like see how this works in action. So I'll put the chart on the screen. Now this is just like Kanye West's birth chart. This is just like a random chart I chose from my like database. But he's a really good example of what I'm talking about in this video. So first things first, obviously his first house is in Cancer. He's a Cancer rising. And so that house would be empty. It doesn't mean he doesn't have a first house, but it just means we have to look at the first house ruler to understand his ascendant sign even more. First house ruler would be the moon, and the moon is in the 9th house. So for him, that means a lot of his identity, a lot of, and really how he approaches the world is based on this very 9th house theme of optimism or idealism, or this sense of gaining wisdom or gaining a lot of knowledge, or expanding one's consciousness. And I think that's very prevalent in his personality, right? He's somebody who strives towards the ideal, somebody who very much seeks to elevate their own consciousness. So if you have that same placement, you can resonate with that same description. And then again, we see his 7th house ruler. I kind of talked about this example earlier, but his 7th house ruler would be Saturn, because he has a Capricorn 7th house. And obviously Capricorn 7th house, Saturn energy on the 7th house cusp kind of suggests a very traditional relationship. So he did get married to Kim Kardashian in a very traditional way. He had a wedding, he has a wife, there's nothing unconventional about that. And he has a 7th house ruler in the 2nd house. So obviously you can see a lot of 2nd house themes in their marriage. It's very stable, it's long lasting, it's dependable. It's not a relationship that it's like, okay, they dated for like 50 days and then like they're done, or married for like a year and they're done. They've been married for several years. And the second house kind of represents stability, longevity, wealth as well. So that's another thing too. I think you could see that in his life, in his marriage, is like when he married Kim Kardashian, it's like, okay, they gained more wealth together than they did apart. And the second house does rule material, wealth, abundance, finance. So their marriage, that's a huge element in their marriage. So yeah, if you guys have questions about your own chart, I'll link down the Cafe Astrology link below. I might answer some comments too, but comment down below what empty houses you have, and by looking at the rulerships, how you can understand your chart better.